Welcome to Exploring Linux. This is Muntasir Mustafa. In this series, we're going to learn how to be an effective system administrator using the guidelines and techniques outlined in Evi Nemeth's book, this Unix and Linux System Administration Handbook. References will be in the description below. So, for our first video, we're going to be outlining the different tasks a system administrator will have to carry out. System admins have to wear a lot of hats to do their job effectively. Let's create a diagram to visualize these tasks, and we're going to get an overview today and go in more depth in future videos. So, for our first task, we can put this in, say, sky blue. We have controlling access. So, we do this by managing accounts and setting permissions to allow us to control what a user is allowed to do on the system. So, as parts of this job, you're going to be needing to create accounts, which involves doing things like setting your passwords, setting the appropriate usernames and user IDs, creating groups, and setting up your home directory. And you're going to be needing to remove inactive accounts, and also deal with account issues. Excuse me. So this would be like if a password was lost by somebody, you would be the person who would be responsible for fixing that problem. All three of these tasks are excellent opportunities for automation. Our next task is adding hardware. So we can do this in red. So, as a part of adding hardware, and this is more specifically for if you have a physical system and not a cloud-based or a virtual system. So, these tasks include installing and configuring your hardware so that it can be recognized by the OS. So, let's put install and configure right here. And also doing device support or hardware support tasks, like adding new components. So next up, we have a very important task, which is task automation. Now, this is a big subject, but essentially, it's very, very, very useful to use as a system administrator for many reasons. First of which, it reduces your workload, and it saves you time, and stops you from having to do repetitive tasks. It avoids a human error of a person having to input each command every single time. And also, since we use scripts to automate things, the script itself can function as documentation, because it'll tell you what it's doing, and if you find a problem, you can look at the script and figure out what went wrong. In future videos, we're going to be covering the best scripting practices, the shell, and useful tools like regular expressions, as well as languages like Python, so stay tuned for that. For our fourth subject, we have what may be the most important system administrator task of them all, overseeing backups. This is very important because hard drives tend to fail a lot, and losing data is catastrophic, so you have to really be on top of this task. So first, you're going to be creating these backups, which is going to mean you'll be working with the tools to create them, and also you're going to have to schedule them to meet the needs of your site whenever is most convenient. Also, you're going to be having to test these backups. That means download them and actually make sure they work in restoring the data. Because if you don't do this and you find out that you can't restore it later, it'll be too late. And finally, we have restoring data. This is in the emergency situation where you actually do lose data and you have to use the backups. Right, let's connect that back here. Our next important task is installing and upgrading software. Upgrading software. There we go. So, for subtasks of this task, we have configuring the software to meet the needs of your users, testing the software to make sure it doesn't cause any problems for your users, updating it regularly when necessary, and the actual installation itself. In future videos, we will cover things like the APT and how to automate these processes even. Monitoring. As a rule, people tend to try to work around a problem rather than reporting it so that you can resolve it. So you have to be taking initiative and watching for these problems and fixing them. As subtasks to this monitoring task, we can divide this into monitoring resources, which include things like CPU usage and memory usage, and performance. So you want to be studying things like the performance of the network, and also looking at logs from applications to check for errors or issues. This is a huge area that could benefit from automation. Oops, I just realized it went a little bit off the screen, so let me redraw this a little bit closer. So, put performance right here. And I wrote network, so let's put that here. Next up, we have, let's do dark blue for this one. We have maintaining local documentation. This is very, very important because without it, others, and even yourself in 6 months after you do something, will not be able to understand how your work works. So using the documentation, you're going to be able to much easier solve errors, and people will understand your system a lot better too. So I'm going to write down maintaining, put documentation. And as a note for this one, you should remember that a diagram is much more effective at communicating ideas than long text documents, especially to people who aren't as tech savvy, like maybe your bosses. So we are very quickly running out of colors here, so I'm going to try to do say a dark green. So our next task is vigilantly monitoring security. I'll put that here, monitoring. Hopefully that's visible. Security. So you're going to be doing this through implementing security measures, of which there are many. Just list off a couple here that are really important. One of the most important is making sure to update with the latest patches. There's other things that you can do, including protecting passwords. We're also running out of space as well as colors. Somebody should have planned this better. You're going to have to also authenticate your users. Doing things like packet filtering is also helpful. I'm just going to put filtering in here. And one last thing to remember about security is that you have to strike a good balance from security to usability for your site. And what I mean by this is Every single site has a different level of security that's going to be needed. There's no one-size-fits-all situation. It depends on what your site needs and how secure it needs to be. Our next task, and I promise this won't be as complicated as a security one. I'm trying to make sure it all fits here. Will be tuning performance. So, there are two main ways that you do this. First is preemptive. It is customizing your system to optimally meet the needs of your users. So right here, let's put tailoring. Let's call it tailoring your system. Next, we have once there is an issue with your network, you're going to have to investigate and solve those issues. So we're just going to write investigate here. Next up, we have troubleshooting. So I'm going to add this also in red, right here. So when a network system fails, you're going to have to investigate what caused the failure in order to solve the problem. One important thing to remember here is it's most likely going to be more difficult to figure out what is actually causing the problem in the first place, rather than actually fixing it. So you're going to have to be very vigilant in your investigation. Then put investigate right here. And just put resolve. Another task that you might have to help with is creating policies. You might be asked for help in developing the policies so that they can meet legal requirements while not being over-restrictive on people in the company. So for this one, I'm just going to write policies right here. Policies development. That's a bit better. Next up, we have working with vendors. So I'll put that right here. It's a little bit dark. Let's try a brighter color. Let's do another red. So working with vendors. So using services and products from third parties is very common. You may be tasked to help negotiate with these vendors or to select the right vendors themselves for your site. So for working with vendors, hopefully that's readable. And as subtasks, let's have selection and negotiation. Here's our final task, firefighting. So as a system administrator, you're going to be spending a lot of time solving problems for people. And not all of these problems will be typical system administrator tasks, but they're still an important part of the job. So no subtask for this one because it could be almost anything. From helping someone fix their computer if it's not working to giving advice. There's so many different things that you can task with. Well, that's it. There's 13 different main tasks here. It's a very messy diagram, but if you want to use this, it'll be in the description below. So yeah, that's it for this video. Tune in for our next lesson, and if you found this helpful, please leave a like. All right, thank you. Have a good week.